the more I get into it, the more I change my definition of connection. I think really sitting and questioning what is a connection, what does it look like, kind of going down that rabbit hole of thought has been a game changer. And then also, I kind of touched on this earlier, but redefining connection, it's not always about physical touch. You can connect with a horse from across the field.
Yeah.
And so that's really, I think, powerful to work with and also teach others about, is that, you don't have to physically touch a horse to connect with them.
There are healers on this planet with the power to soften the suffering of mankind, yet they have remained in the recesses of the world, abused, discarded, and labeled as trash. This is The Touch of a Mustang. I am your host, Shalise Clough, and I'm here to tell the story of wild horses, Mustangs, and the humans who are discovering and sharing their gifts while working to protect their well-being and preserve their spirit, so this divine power won't be lost. Join us on this quest with the Wild Mustang. Hi, Kaity. Thanks for being here at The Touch of a Mustang.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for the invite.
I'm really excited to have you. I love your Instagram post. You share about equine therapy, which is what you do, but I also just love the approach you take with your horses, and the way you show life with horses is really fun. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved with horses and how they came to be part of your life.
It all started when I was living on the East Coast. I grew up in Virginia, and when I was about 13 years old, I started volunteering at a horse therapy farm because I really wanted lessons. And when I first got into horses, my parents just weren't ready to commit to riding lessons. So that was like my gateway into just being around horses.
Yeah.
Because when you volunteer, you get to brush them and lead them around. And I was just so happy to be around horses. So that's how I got into it. And eventually I started taking lessons. I got my own horse. And when I was younger, I was really interested into getting into it like professionally. Like I wanted to train and compete professionally.
Yeah.
And right out of high school, I took a couple of different like working student positions, which if you don't already know, it's basically like you exchange labor for riding lessons and training. And I grew like really disheartened around horses, like in general, from those experiences, because like I said, I wanted to do this professionally, and I found a professional, quote unquote professional, to work with. And it was a lot of getting off the track thoroughbreds and flipping them, training them to event. And I just found that it didn't have the horse's best interest in mind. I got a lot of experience at that farm about like, horses being rushed into things that they weren't ready for.
What were some of the things that you saw there that kind of clicked that in your mind that maybe there was a different way, or what they were doing didn't feel great?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, giving the horses anti-inflammatories before a competition and after a competition because they weren't sound enough to compete. That was a big one. And it was kind of like one of those unspoken rules, like, okay, just slip them the butte. We're not going to talk about it. That kind of a thing. And then also just general horse keeping practices. The horses get a giant bucket of grain in the morning and evening instead of like 24/7 forage. Things like that, where at that point in my life, that was like normal to me because it was so, like that if you grow up around like the typical like show barn or whatever, that's what you see and you don't know to question it.
Right.
Now that I'm outside of it, I can look back and see that, some of these horse keeping practices and training practices just created like a unhappy environment. And so, I got out of horses entirely after that experience. I sold my horse, sold my tack. I was I'm not doing this at all.
And how old were you then?
I was like 19 or 20.
Okay. So just getting into the adult world.
Yeah, exactly. And I eventually moved out here to Arizona. And so when I was about 21 years old, I started volunteering at a therapy farm again because like the horse instinct in my veins never left. I just, I took that break. And that's when I started having these thoughts of like, okay, I really want to be with horses, but it has to be different.
Yeah.
it has to be good for the horse and good for the people as well. So it all kind of came full circle when I came out here to Arizona, and I got to start volunteering with horses again and being with them in that capacity at a
Yeah.
therapy farm rather than like the competition side.
Yeah. And what differences did you see in the environment between the two? Were those different experiences some of what have kind of led to what you're doing today, I would assume?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely still say that in general, horse keeping practices out here in Arizona, they have their own pros and cons.
Yeah.
But I would say like the number one difference between being at a therapy farm versus a competition barn is that with horse therapy, everyone is there because they love the animal, they love the horse, and everyone's working together for the good rather than like for the individual.
Yeah.
Like with therapy, it's more of like a team and group effort, whereas
Mm-hmm.
with horse competition, it's individual.
Yeah. So you started volunteering, and then where did things go from there?
I was given the opportunity to start teaching lessons. And for a little while, for a couple years, I was doing lessons and training. But even within my experience doing lessons and training, it just kept going back to the horse therapy. It kept going back to doing these non mounted lessons.
Mm.
And then I learned about equine assisted learning. I didn't know what that was. But out here where I am, it's a like quickly growing field. And all of a sudden I found this niche that I fit perfectly into, that I was good at, and that other people had a good experience with, with me teaching. And so basically I gave up doing lessons and training and I switched solely over to equine assisted learning, and working with other practitioners as well to offer equine therapy. And that was
Mm-hmm.
only a couple of years ago. So for
Okay.
me, it was like a big jump to say I'm not
Yeah.
doing lessons and training anymore. I'm just doing non-mounted equine assisted learning.
Mm-hmm.
And so that brings us to present day. My current program, it's mostly non-mounted equine assisted learning. So yeah, that's kind of
Awesome.
like the story in a nutshell.
Yeah. And so for anyone who might not know what equine assisted learning is, can you kind of expand upon that?
Yeah, so it's kind of an umbrella term for having an experience with the horses. The way that I describe it is that I empower women and youth to build confidence through relationship building with horses. And so the way that I practice it is I bring my clients out and I teach them about equine body language and relationship building with horses, and then within the herd, and they can take that experience and relate it to their own personal life.
What are some of the things that first got you interested in like therapy and equine
Mm-hmm.
assisted activities versus competition, or even, maybe just having a horse and riding it on a personal basis?
Yeah. I would say what really attracted me to the horse therapy side is how selfless it can be. Because, like I was mentioning earlier, it's more of a group effort. It's not so much like individualistic, where it's like, I want to achieve a certain thing and I'm going to make it happen. With horse therapy, it's like there's a child or someone in need, and we're going to work together as a team to, bring some joy, some happiness, some love into this person's life. So that's what I really like about it. But as far as me personally being attracted to horses, it's like horses were my very first conscious thought. Like there was never a time
Hmm.
where I wasn't thinking about horses. So
Yeah.
it's come together really beautifully, that I get to run this program and, keep the horses happy, and I get to help people at the same time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about your program, what exactly you do, who's all involved, just all of
Yeah.
it. The horses.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so we're out on about 5 acres in Queen Creek, Arizona.
Okay.
We have a pretty mixed herd. We have some mules, we have some horses, we even have a llama.
Awesome.
So, yeah, she's super fun. I own 3 of the horses, and my roommate has 3 other horses. And I'm really blessed that she allows me to use her horses in the program as well.
Yeah.
They're all really well trained, most of them are older. And I found a really specific niche out here in Arizona. I mostly see homeschooled kids because there's a program called the ESA program, and I'm like an approved vendor for them.
Hmm.
So for homeschooled kids in Arizona, they essentially get funding to do extracurricular activities. And
Oh, yeah.
so because I'm certified through EGALA, they get to come to my ranch, and it's paid for through this program.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my kids are on the spectrum, homeschooled. A lot of these kids experience bullying in like the public school system, and now their parents are trying out something different. And I will say too, like equine-assisted learning has been really recognized lately. Like it's becoming a lot more well known,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say a lot more parents are kind of opening themselves up to the idea that horses can help their kid with their self-esteem, their confidence, standing taller and experiencing joy. I would say that's, the essence of the program out here.
Yeah. And so, what are some of the ways that you have seen horses help maybe the different groups of people that you work with?
The number one thing that comes to mind is horses really help people learn about emotional intelligence. With horses, you get this instant feedback. So for example, if I'm working with a kid who is on the spectrum, autistic, and they might not naturally have that emotional intelligence, they might
Yeah.
struggle with getting along with their peers and reading body language and social cues and that sort of a thing. I can teach them how the horses communicate with each other. I can teach them about equine body language. And I've gotten the feedback, not just from one person, but I can think of several examples in my head where this kid tells me like, oh, I saw that horse, for example, pin its ears and the other one backed away. And then they can take that example into their real personal life. Like I was playing
Yeah.
with a friend and they became annoyed. So I backed away. So
Mm.
that's kind of like a more specific example of how they can go from a session with the horse and then apply it to everyday life.
Right. Kind of help them to see those personal insights where they
Mm-hmm.
can understand a little better, like people are reacting to me in this way because of these factors.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really cool when I get to, witness that happening.
Yeah. So a lot of the children, they have been homeschooled because school just didn't fit them well. They
Mm-hmm.
struggled in it. Is that the case in a lot of instances?
Yeah, because if you think about it, a lot of these kids who aren't neurotypical, they learn in a different way. The public school system is very much a one size fits all. And if you don't fit
Yeah.
in, then, you're the outcast. And
Right.
then, too, like I was saying, if they lack some of these social awareness skills, that can lead to it as well. And it really just digs at these kids' confidence. Like they come to me with like very low self-esteem, very low confidence because they were bullied. The other kids were just mean to them. So being able to brush a horse and lead this 1,000-pound animal around and have a connection and a relationship with it, I've seen it really help repair some of that low self-esteem and self-confidence issues.
Yeah. And I've actually heard that a lot, which is interesting because it's something I didn't really think about before I started doing the podcast about confidence being one of the ways that horses can help us. But I've
Mhm.
heard that a lot and even experienced it personally. Do you have any instances of someone that you've seen where it just really created a change for them in that area?
Yeah, I have one specific client in mind. She started with me last year.
Mm-hmm.
In her very first session with me, she was so terrified of horses. She could barely pick up a brush and put a brush on this horse.
Wow.
Like that was
Mm-hmm.
our first session, was just spending the time like holding a brush and being kind of close to a horse, right?
Right.
Because she was so scared of them. Fast forward almost 1 year later, she is haltering independently, tacking up by herself, riding around independently,
Oh, awesome.
and really like asserting herself. I think that's what I saw within her, is she really did stand taller, and she stood her ground too, because we're working with some mules, which they tend to be a little bit more headstrong than the
Yeah.
horses. And
Right.
she learned how to handle that with grace and with strength as well. So
Yeah.
that's one specific example where I was so blown away by our first session being, like to an outsider that might look like nothing's going on, just brushing a horse, but to her that
Right.
was such a big deal, and it was also the very first step into all of these other really powerful changes in her life.
Yeah. And so have you seen these things that they learn with the horse reflect back into other areas of their life? And what has that looked like?
Yeah. I will say I get the feedback often from parents that coming to the farm is like the highlight of their week. It's something that they talk about all week. When can we come back to the farm? And
Yeah.
I think that just having something like that to look forward to just enhances life in general, especially as a kid when you have this exciting thing. It's like that kind of brightens up the rest of your week. And I say this because I can relate to it too. Like I remember being in middle school and high school and just like waiting for my weekly lesson on Wednesday and how
Yeah.
that made the rest of the week so much more bearable. And
Yeah.
I've seen with the kids that I'm working with, I think they're experiencing something similar.
Yeah. And how cool for them to be able to go do something that's good for themselves and that they can immediately feel that. Like, not
Mm-hmm.
only is it good for them, they're learning these skills, but they feel that and understand that. A lot of kids go to school and it's not necessarily like exciting or the best experience, but
Right.
for them to be able to realize, like, yeah, a lot of things that are good for you in life should also make you feel good. That's really
Mm-hmm.
cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, did you say you also work with women?
I do, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that part of your program?
Yeah, so it's a part of my program that I just recently started to develop
Nice.
because I've just noticed that, horses aren't just good for kids, they're good for everyone.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, and so I have one client specifically. I actually used to travel to her and teach her and her kids, like in her backyard. But she's bringing out a group of managers for a team building day. And
Oh,
we did
cool.
this about a couple of years ago as well, and we're gonna do it again at the end of October. But I think that's a really cool opportunity because we're taking kind of this more like corporate approach where all these people are, managers within a business, and they're
Mm-hmm.
coming out to the horse farm to learn about, like I said before, the emotional intelligence, but also team building, working together. And I also really do like to teach people to be a lot more sensitive and intuitive around the horses. I think that's a really important skill, not just for kids, but also for adults to
Yeah.
learn to tap into.
Yeah. What are some of the strategies or activities that you do for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like it's so funny. I always come up with a plan and then the day comes around and the
Yeah.
horses like laugh at me.
Yeah. Creates
But
its own.
yeah, exactly. But what I did this last time around is, of course, I give a general like safety briefing beforehand, all the basics,
Mm-hmm.
like don't run up behind a horse or whatever. But then within the like specific exercises that I offer is I have people break up into small groups and go out and observe the horses. That's
Yeah.
always step number one is just watching the horses.
Mm,
And then coming back together and sharing what you noticed.
yeah.
I also asked people to give me their perception on like what the horse's personality was like. And this is where like some of the really interesting patterns come out is because someone might put a certain description on one horse and someone else within the group might completely disagree. And then we can have
Mm-hmm.
a discussion about, what they noticed and why they would describe that horse's behavior that way.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And also seems very different from a lot of times how horses are approached, where, and tell me if this resonates with your experience at the show
Hmm.
barn, but a lot of times I don't know that people always take the time to necessarily consider the horse in that
Right.
way or to look at them in that way. And usually the first step isn't like, go observe the horse. It's like, let's get on and do lessons or whatnot.
Right.
How did that contrast from maybe your experience in the show world or
Hmm.
professional world?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and it definitely resonates because I've noticed a lot of people feel entitled to touch horses and to ride them. And
Mm-hmm.
because my program really shies away from that, it shies away from the riding and like that egotistical, like, let's go do something with them.
Yeah.
I really like to start with people observing the horse. And then I also talk a lot about consent for touch. I really emphasize that the horse needs to approach you. If you go and approach the horse and they walk away, or they don't want that physical contact, we're not going to force it. And this is like not kind of, it is a radical idea for a lot of people, especially if you've never been around horses before. I've noticed that people who come in who don't have horse experience, the first thing they want to do is they want to go up and touch the horse's face.
Yeah.
Um, And so it is kind of interesting, like explaining, like, that's not what we're starting with. That might be a point that we get to eventually, but that's not the starting point. I think that does start to open up people's ideas about, like what it means to be connected to a horse. Because that's something else I explain, is that connecting with a horse doesn't always mean physical contact.
Yeah. How does that approach change your horses, do you think? Have you seen differences because of that?
Yeah, I would say, and I've gotten this feedback from others, so it's not just coming from me, but my horses are really happy to be around people. I'm sure you've seen it too, where you go to barns and you grab a halter or something and the horses just run. Or you go up to pet them and they turn away from you and they walk the other way. I would say my horses are really friendly and curious, and they're happy to connect with people, but I am also very careful to keep that connection consensual and like pure.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I've told this story before, but when I had my Mustang mare and I was kind of at a stuck point in training her, I didn't really know what I was doing when I adopted her. But I went and met with a trainer, and like the first thing I noticed is the horses she was training didn't want to be anywhere close to her. And that was something that I knew I didn't want. So I went a totally different route, which was great because I learned so much from it. But I really think that does say a lot about the interactions that the horses want to have with us, can really tell us a lot about what we're doing and how they feel being around us. So I really like that. So tell us about some of the horses that you have and kind of where they come from. And
okay. Yeah, all of our horses have a really interesting story. The first one I want to share with you is Tater Tot. He's a mule.
that's cute.
He's my roommate's horse. So he is the one with like the biggest personality. He's very quirky. He's got that like large puppy dog. Like he really wants to be with you. He likes his ears being scratched. And people who come out, I feel like they either love him or they hate him. You know, those kinds of horses where
it's very polarizing.
Yeah. And so he's the one who teaches people how to stand their ground, because he's the kind of horse. Well, I keep saying horse. I use horse and mule interchangeably, but he's a mule. Like if you put the lead rope on him and you just ask him to go, like he'll plant his feet and he'll say no. And so this is where I think it's polarizing, because people are either patient and they can work with that, or they get really impatient and say, why isn't he listening to me?
Yeah. Have you noticed certain personality types that are kind of the ones that are drawn to him versus those that would rather avoid him?
Yeah, I would say the people who are drawn to him are very loud, very extroverted, I would say. Some of the more quiet people off-put by him, I think, because he's very like rambunctious.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that they can't learn how to work together, because they can, but just right off the bat, if I were to categorize it, that's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting.
So that's Tater Tot. We also have Pave. She's my horse, who I've had for almost 6 years, I think. Again, a very polarizing horse, because she's your typical very sensitive and intuitive mare. And she's also one who doesn't love physical contact. So if you want to go up and brush her and cuddle her, like she'll not be happy about that.
Yeah, it's not her thing.
Not her thing. And she's also the kind of horse where like she will pick and choose who she connects with. So some people she'll go up to and spend a lot of time with, and other people it's like she won't even look their direction.
Yeah.
And to kind of like apply the same personality thing to her, I would say that people who are more intuitive and sensitive definitely can connect with her. People who have been through any type of like trauma in their life as well, because Pave's backstory is that she spent many, many years in a stall without turnout, without contact, without much contact with people and horses. And so when she came into my life, it's like she went from being in this little stall to now having more of a normal life for a horse. And so the adjustment for her was difficult. So, you know,
that's a big change.
Yeah, for sure. So she's a lot more well-adjusted now. She's very attached to the llama. So people find this very entertaining. She treats the llama like it's her foal. So, yeah.
That's funny.
That's the other thing. I do have to tell people to not go up to the llama, because if you go and chase the llama, then Pave comes running in and
she's kind of the caretaker.
Yeah, exactly. So
Protector.
she's very nurturing and protecting in that way. There's also Mirabelle. I'll group Mirabelle and Dickie together because they're both 27 years old.
Mm.
Um, so they're our seniors, and they've kind of lived opposite lives of each other. Dickie is this quarter horse that was very well accomplished as a show horse, and he has all this, great breeding. I don't know a lot about that world,
Right. Yeah, me
but
neither.
yeah, but you can tell just by looking at him, he's really, really, really good looking for his age,
Mm-hmm.
because he was taken care of like immaculately his whole life.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
Mirabelle, she came into my life a couple years ago, neglected, pretty much starved, overgrown hooves,
Mm.
and she has
Yeah.
bounced back quite a bit. But you can tell she just, her bones are tired compared to Dickie.
Yeah.
So that's something I like to show people. I like to show them Dickie and Mirabelle side by side and say, this is the difference between a horse that was loved and taken care of for his whole life and a horse that
Mm.
wasn't.
Yeah.
So even though they're the same age, same color, I would assume same breed, they're worlds
Yeah.
apart. So,
Yeah. That's interesting. And same thing for us humans,
mm-hmm,
how are we taking care of ourselves really can make a
mm-hmm,
difference down the line
yeah.
and how we feel when we're older.
Yeah, yeah. So we also have Shadowfax. She's a gated. I don't know exactly what she is. She's about 14. But she has been like the most spectacular therapy horse. Whenever people need to like
Hmm.
process something big or heavy, Shadow
Yeah.
volunteers herself, which is so interesting because I wouldn't say I would like she's not usually my first choice because sometimes she can be a little bit like hyper and reactive.
Mm-hmm.
But I have noticed when people need to process something, she will come up and volunteer herself in that session.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So,
interesting.
yeah, I think that's everyone that we have out there.
And so, how did some of those horses are yours, some are your roommates? How did a lot of
Mhm.
them get to this point where they're with you guys now?
So, actually, I forgot. I just got a horse about a month ago. So,
It's new.
he's new. Okay, but he can apply though. So, all three of my horses were given to me. And that's kind of my philosophy with getting horses is that just throughout my life, I've been gifted horses at the right place and right time.
Mm.
So
Wow.
that's what happened with Diamond. He's an 8-year-old off the track thoroughbred. He's a really, really good horse. And I don't know exactly his owner's situation, but he reached out to me and said that he's trying to sell Diamond, but if I were to use him in my program, he would be happy to gift Diamond
Mm.
to me / the program. But I was able to take him in. Pave, I was telling you about her earlier. She was just, like I said, I shouldn't say she, I should say I was in the right place at the right time to bring her into my life.
Yeah.
And then same with Mirabelle. I just happened to have a truck and trailer one day and I was renting it. I don't even own a truck and trailer, but
Oh,
I had it
wow.
with me one day and the barn owner was like, this horse's owner went MIA, hasn't paid board in months. I don't
Oh,
want to keep
man.
feeding her. Can you take her? So I
Mm-hmm.
took her.
Wow. Yeah.
And then with my roommates' horses, I know a couple of them came from an auction. A couple of them came from like friends of friends, but my roommate shares the same philosophy as me that once a horse comes into her life, it's there for life.
Yeah.
So she does a really good job of taking care of them and giving them like a good forever home.
Yeah. And what a blessing for these horses because a lot of times when horses age out of whatever they're doing, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they are just discarded, but how cool that they can kind of have another second little career in life helping people and then in return receiving that care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too, about half of our herd is okay for riding and the other half is not sound for riding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really great to, like you said, be able to give these horses a chance to do something that's like engaging and fulfilling.
Yeah.
That, if they were in more of a typical horse situation, they wouldn't have a place there.
Yeah. What are some of the benefits that you found with doing a lot of the learning that your clients do just on the ground versus getting them in the saddle?
The number one thing that comes to mind is safety. There's a lot of safety considerations around horses, even horses like mine who are older and well trained and
Yeah.
calm for the most part. I would say like a lot of these programs that just take people and throw them on a horse immediately, like we're missing we're missing so much, doing that. One of the benefits of coming out and starting non-mounted is that you learn equine body language, you learn equine behavior. You get comfortable and confident on the ground first, just leading them around and learning the basics. And I would say, I think that would be really beneficial if that was more normalized.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, is how beneficial that is for any owner to, I know, like when I grew up, it was, you just jumped on, you didn't really pay attention. Yeah. And then that all changed when I got my Mustang, because I was like, oh geez, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But it really helped me to learn the value of just that time on the ground. And one of the things that I love now is just like hand walking my horses, which is weird, like take your horse on a walk, but something I've used a lot, especially as I've been training them or wanting to get my kids on them, as you point out, horses, there is an inherent danger to being involved with a large animal, and we can't control all the variables, but knowing them well enough, which a lot of that you can learn so good on the ground, can really eliminate and diminish a lot of potential dangers and prevent accidents and, going too fast for the horse when they're not comfortable and things like that. So I love that you focus on that. What are some of the big things that lead up to, well, let me rephrase that. So when do you transition into the saddle, if you do happen to do that with people?
Yeah, so I do allow certain clients to ride. It's not something that I openly advertise because I don't want people coming to me for riding lessons.
Right.
But I always tell my clients that I leave it up to them. When they feel confident, when they feel comfortable, and when they feel ready, then we can start exploring some under saddle work. But the timeline looks different for everyone. For some people, it can be 2 sessions on the ground and okay, they got the basics down and they're ready. And then for some other kids who, especially the ones who are really scared of horses at first, it can take them a year or more to be ready to get to that point.
Yeah. And when you are teaching these different skills, is it something that you're actively doing, or does a lot of it come naturally just from the interactions where you maybe don't even need to say anything or point it out, but they're learning it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of it does happen naturally. In my training, I've been taught to ask questions, so I won't necessarily tell them what's happening or what they should be looking for, but I'll ask questions that kind of gets their mind thinking in the direction that would be towards learning.
Yeah. And so on that note, what is some of the training that you've done, or if someone wants to get involved in this same area of horsemanship, what's some of the training you've done, and what are some of the takeaways that you've had from that?
Yeah, so there's so many different certifications and programs that you can go through to become certified equine-assisted learning and therapy. I personally chose to go through EGALA, which is the Equine-Assisted Growth and Learning Association. And their program focuses on group work. So you have an equine specialist. So that's what I am. I'm a certified equine specialist through EGALA. And then you have a mental health professional, a horse, and a client. So it's very group-based. But I do like their model because they teach you to be very non-judgmental. Like I said, asking the right questions. And they also teach you to not quantify anything. So, for example, you wouldn't tell your client oh, the horse is mad because XYZ. You would say something like, I noticed the ears are back, and then prompt the client to go forward from there. And the reason I chose EGALA too is that they are very well known and their certification is pretty well recognized. So if you need a certification for any sort of reason, that's why I chose them, is because they're pretty well recognized. And then too, every year there's a barn in my area that hosts a certification with them. So
nice.
That makes it pretty easy. I don't have to travel out of state to get it.
That's always a plus for sure, not having to travel. And so how have horses impacted your life?
I mean, they've shaped my entire life. They've impacted me from the beginning. Like I said, my very first conscious thought was, of horses, and I spent all my young years, like thinking, okay, how can I bring horses into my life, or how can I, go and work with horses? And then,
Was
go
when
ahead.
you were thinking about how to have horses in your life, was it usually in the professional realm that you thought of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was my dream to compete and train as a
Mm-hmm.
career. And you heard a little bit about how I did get into that and then quickly pivoted.
Yeah.
But even today, like my whole lifestyle is revolved around these horses. I'm trying to think of like how I can like put it into like a concise thought or sentence, but horses have helped me so much. Relationally, I've learned a lot about relationship through horses. And I've also learned a lot about compassion too. It was only a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago at this point, when I found positive reinforcement training, because
Mm-hmm.
my horse Pave just wasn't responding really well to more traditional ways.
Yeah.
And that just opened up a whole door to compassionate horsemanship, and also like anything that happens within horses, like learning patience and kindness and forgiveness to my horse, I can then take that and apply it to all the people in my life as well,
Yeah,
which
for
is a
sure.
benefit for everyone.
Yeah.
So
Is there a single horse that has had the most impact on you?
yeah, my horse Pave, for sure. I can kind of briefly share a little bit about that story. She's the one who was in a stall for many years. She didn't have a lot of interaction with people or horses. And then when she came into my life, she was just so hyper vigilant, very spooky and just reactive. And, if you can imagine, it's such a big difference to go from standing in one stall for several
Yeah.
years to now there's this person asking me to do things.
Yeah.
And my horsemanship at the time that I got her wasn't, it was there, but it was more on the traditional side of what I've learned of add pressure if you're not getting the result that you want. And that's like this moment that really changed my course with horses. Is I was trying to get her to walk over this bridge, this wooden bridge, and she refused. So I did what I was taught to do, and I just kept pulling and pulling and adding more and more weight, getting more aggressive and loud and demanding. And she ended up rearing up, like a movie horse, like up over my head. She
Mm,
did it several times. And thankfully, I was all alone at this moment. There was nobody else at the barn but me and her. And after she reared, I sat down and I looked her in the eyes and I was like, there's got to be a better way. Like, this
yeah.
doesn't feel right. That, like, you're not responding well to this. I'm not asking you the right questions, but I don't know what's next.
Yeah.
And like I said, that's when I went online and I found positive reinforcement training. And so I jumped right into it with her, and she started just really excelling in our connection and our training. And she's a much happier and calm and much more well-rounded horse today. But I think my working with her and experiencing a horse that doesn't respond well to more traditional horse training, up until that point in my life, I've never really encountered that before. Like, I always thought of horses as like just being extremely obedient, and like I said, if they aren't listening, then add a whip, add more pressure, be
Yeah.
louder. But with her, she really, really did not respond well to that. So she challenged me in looking into a different way, like a more compassionate and loving way. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And mindful of her and what she's feeling. Cause yeah,
yeah.
it is funny how we just want our horses to do these things just because, stand there while we wave stuff at you or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, I think sometimes we're just kind of bringing chaos into their world and they're probably
Yeah.
wondering, what are you trying to do? But I think it's a great point that horses can excel even if it's not done traditionally. I was actually just thinking about this the other day. I'd taken my Mustang mare out into the forest and we lost the trail a little bit. So we were going over these huge logs because like I could still get through, but it was really hard to find a place for her and I to get through.
Mm-hmm.
But it was funny because I remember when I first started training her, like I'd put a board in the corral and try and get her to walk over it. And she's like, no way.
Mm-hmm.
But when she actually needed to do it, when it had some purpose, like it was no problem at all for her to jump over, logs that were a foot and a half high or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times we kind of panic, like our horse should be doing this. And, it may work itself out if we're just consistent and we just build that relationship first. So I really like that. Are there other ways that you have seen like your horsemanship and your approach either with horses or with the equine therapy evolve over time?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question is I've been getting really curious about just how to make my horse's life the best possible. So I do my best to mimic like natural, healthy, holistic horse keeping. So they're all turned out 24/7, 24/7 forage. We were kind of touching base earlier on keeping the connection really good between the horses and anyone who comes by the farm. But something I've been really curious about lately is hoof trimming. And this is something that for my whole life with horses, I was just taught, like, you leave that to a professional. If you want to learn it, you go to school. And like, it's like not something that the average like lay person even touches or thinks about. Thankfully, I've been working with like a really amazing hoof trimmer who's also really encouraging and empowering towards education.
That's awesome.
And just watching her trim my horse's hooves, because they're all barefoot. So I'm talking about barefoot trimming specifically.
Yeah.
She's been really encouraging me to pick up this skill to learn myself. I think that alone is amazing. I love working with other professionals who are encouraging more people to follow their profession, instead of like the attitude of, it's scarce and I need to keep it to myself. I think it's really cool to expand in this way. So I've been taking up an interest in learning about the health of horse hooves and just things like that. But as far as horsemanship goes, I feel like that's always evolving. I just finished an online course called Emotional Horsemanship. Have you heard of that?
I haven't.
With Lockie Phillips.
Okay, I've heard of Lockie Phillips, but I haven't heard of the course.
So he has a foundational online course teaching his mother foal bonding techniques. So I just watched all of the instructional videos for that and went through that online course. And it's a really unique method that I'm really curious to go try with my horses. But it's just something like that where it's like, I've never heard of it before. I went and I took this online course and now I have this new like tool in my tool belt to go try with the horses. So I'm always looking to grow and expand in that way and learn new things.
Yeah, and it is really neat that there are so many different avenues opening up to just open horse owners' eyes, that there's a lot of ways that you can interact with your horse, and there's not just one traditional path that you must take. There's lots of different relationships you have, activities you can do with them, and approaches as well. So that's really cool that it is out there so much more. And I think it's great to learn those things, because I don't know where you're at, but I trim my horse's hooves, but it was actually because I couldn't find anyone to come do it, So eventually I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to kind of learn about it and start doing it. But I think it's good to kind of have that self-sufficiency where we can care for our horses and we don't have to always depend on professionals, but we're always learning and expanding the ways that we can help our horses. So I really like that. I love that you're really digging into a lot of different ways. So was there anything from the course with Lockie Phillips that especially stood out to you?
Yeah. The whole mother foal bonding technique is something that I saw it happening between my horse Pave and the llama. I've seen it happen for the last couple of years that they've been together, but I was never able to like really put words to it or fully understand what was happening. And so in Lockie's course, it's really clear and concise and easy to understand. He really empowers the viewer to take action and practice it with your own horse in a way that's meaningful and safe and all these good things. So that's what stood out to me, is how clear the information was, because I don't know, if you're anything like me, when you are presented with new information, it can kind of be intimidating because you start thinking like, okay, am I skilled enough to know this? Like, do I have the right setup for me and my horses? All of these things. But I think the way that it's presented in the course, he really kind of douses those fires if they come up.
Yeah, that is cool. You talked a little bit about connection. What are some of the things you've learned about connection and horses and humans in the time that you've really been kind of a big focus of your work, I would guess?
Yeah, connection is a huge focus point. I would say the biggest thing is that the more I get into it, the more I change my definition of connection. I think really sitting and questioning what is a connection, what does it look like, kind of going down that rabbit hole of thought has been a game changer. And then also, I kind of touched on this earlier, but redefining connection, it's not always about physical touch.
Yeah.
You can connect with a horse from across the field.
Yeah.
And so that's really, I think, powerful to work with, and also teach others about, is that, you don't have to physically touch a horse to connect with them.
Yeah. And so how has you kind of talked about how that's evolved a little bit for you? What are some of the ideas that have changed and developed around connection and how that plays out?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is that, like, I think I went into horses with kind of this backwards idea of connection where you get on and you ride first, and if you have any type of difficulty connecting with a horse, then you ride it out, right? You get on their
Yeah.
back and you work them, you make them sweat and all these things.
Yeah. Very common
Yeah, it's very
approach.
common. Yes. And so what I've learned about connection is that when you connect with your horse on the ground in a really meaningful way, where both the horse and the human understands each other, it eliminates quite a bit of problems, both on the ground and under saddle. And so, even going further into this, when I was younger, I had a lot of riding accidents where I would fall off. I ended up, breaking a bone doing it.
Oh, wow.
Just getting into these really sketchy situations,
Mm-hmm.
where looking back, it's like, that would have never happened today if I was in that same situation because we would have never gotten to that point of explosion.
Yeah.
But I think being able to read horses, connect with them, and really form a healthy relationship with them on the ground first. When you really start learning about horses and applying yourself to them, I think it can eliminate a lot of accidents.
I agree with that 100%. Just a lot of times we do, we're not necessarily comfortable on the ground with them, but let's hop on their back and see how
Right,
that
yeah.
goes. And
Yeah, what's that about?
yeah, and no, that's a thing that I always do, especially with my kids. Like, you pay attention to how they're feeling. Like, you feel good about getting on. You feel like you guys, you know how they're feeling. And I think that's really important that we have that mindfulness. And like you say, that can definitely reflect into our life with other people, that we can actually be mindful of, oh, okay, hey, I can tell that maybe this is not the best time to have this discussion, or,
Mm-hmm.
maybe the way I'm behaving is causing some reactions in the other person. So I really like that. Are there any other memorable examples that you have of clients that you've worked with and how horses have helped change them or help them to maybe heal?
Yeah, a common difficulty that children on the spectrum experience is being overwhelmed by the sensory input. So, if you can imagine a kid going from being indoors to the artificial lighting, AC, all these things, to then coming out to the horse farm where it's dirty, it's smelly, it's really
Yeah.
hot, you get sweaty, the horses want to slobber on you, all
Yeah.
these things.
It's
That can be
definitely
really,
not clean.
yeah, and it's a lot different from, like being inside. And so,
Yeah.
a lot of kids struggle, first of all, with the transition from one environment to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And then, second of all, they can also struggle with the sensory input. So, the strong smells and the strong sensations and touches and all of that. So,
Yeah.
what I've found is that kids who come to me who struggle with those things, eventually we can acclimate them and get them more comfortable and more used to kind of this different sensory input of the farm. But that's really empowering to be able to go from the first session of like, I'm very overwhelmed and overstimulated and
Yeah.
disgusted even by some of this things that are happening here,
Right.
to
Yeah.
then being able to like tolerate it, and not only tolerate it but also enjoy it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really empowering experience to have.
Yeah. And such a good life lesson for them to take with them moving into the future. Just that a lot of things, yeah, aren't comfortable at first. We kind of have to push past a little bit to get to a place where we can excel and be able to enjoy something or develop skills or succeed in something. For people who are interested in supporting your work or learning more about it, where can they find you? What can they do for that?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. Alma Vida Horse Ranch. And then I'm also on Facebook and YouTube. Those are my only 3 social media platforms. I also have a website, almavidahorseranch.com. That's where you can reach out and fill in the box if you're interested in coming out to the horse farm to work with me.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So yeah, I like to keep it simple on the internet.
Yeah, no, that's good. I just want to really commend you for the work you're doing. I think it's awesome how you are able to take these horses into people's lives, and especially these children who are struggling, and give them a place where they can learn and grow and develop a lot of those skills that, we all need, but especially when there's struggle, how valuable that is to be able to, improve your human interactions. And so I think the work you do is really awesome. Your accounts are super fun to follow. I didn't know you had YouTube, so we'll have to follow you there so that I can keep up to date there. And I appreciate you coming out today and sharing with us about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. And I'm so happy that the stars finally aligned so that we can talk together.
Thank you for joining us and learning about horses that heal and the humans who help them. We hope you'll continue with us on this journey. We'd love for you to subscribe on your favorite platform and follow The Touch of a Mustang on any of the major social media outlets. Please share with your friends, anyone who loves horses, or anyone who might be struggling and could benefit from this message. If you have felt the healing power of horses or help them in their divinely appointed mission, please reach out. We want to hear your story. As we say goodbye, always remember that the horse is always there to help you heal.